The Philadelphia Experiment, Vanishing into Thin Air. In the shadowy corridors of World War II-era military research, few stories loom as large, or as persistently debated, as the Philadelphia Experiment. Allegedly conducted by the U.S. Navy in 1943 aboard the USS Eldridge, this classified operation sought to render a naval vessel invisible to enemy detection using advanced electromagnetic fields. But what began as a plausible, if ambitious, wartime initiative descended into something far more unsettling. Reports of the ship not only vanishing from radar, but physically dematerializing from its berth in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, only to reappear minutes later, hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia. Worse still, crew members were said to have suffered horrific consequences, some fused with the ship's metal bulkheads, others driven violently insane, and a few simply gone, never to be seen again. Though officially dismissed as myth, the roots of the Philadelphia Experiment trace back to a real scientific pursuit, Einstein's unified field theory, which attempted to merge electromagnetism and gravity into a single framework. Declassified documents revealed that the Office of Naval Research did explore theoretical applications of electromagnetic cloaking during the 1940s, lending a sliver of credence to the tale. Crucially, a key figure emerged in the 1950s, Carl M. Allen, writing under the pseudonym Carlos Allende, who bombarded astronomer and UFO researcher Morris K. Jessup with cryptic letters detailing the experiment's catastrophic outcome. Allen claimed to have witnessed the Eldridge's teleportation from a nearby merchant vessel, describing scenes of men screaming as their bodies phased in and out of reality. Skeptics argue the story conflates real naval degaussing techniques used to make ships magnetically invisible to mines with science fiction. Yet persistent anomalies remain. Former crew members of the USS Eldridge have, in rare interviews, described unexplained equipment malfunctions and memory lapses during that period. More intriguingly, documents obtained via FOIA requests show that in the years following the alleged experiment, the Navy quietly expanded research into electromagnetic propulsion and perceptual manipulation, areas once considered fringe. While no smoking gun proves the Eldridge literally blinked out of existence, the convergence of theoretical physics, wartime secrecy, and eyewitness trauma paints a portrait of an event that may have brushed against thresholds modern science still struggles to define. Whether a failed experiment or an outright fabrication, the Philadelphia Experiment endures as a chilling parable of humanity's reckless flirtation with forces that warp not just matter, but the very fabric of perception.
2. Project Stargate, Remote Viewing and the Weaponization of Consciousness. Long before the Internet turned psychic phenomena into late-night entertainment, the U.S. government invested decades and tens of millions of dollars into a top-secret program to harness the human mind as an intelligence-gathering tool. Born in the paranoia-soaked aftermath of the Cold War, Project Stargate emerged from a startling premise. If the Soviet Union was exploring psychic espionage, America couldn't afford to fall behind. What followed was a clandestine odyssey into remote viewing, the practice of psychically perceiving distant locations, objects, or events, conducted under the auspices of the CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and U.S. Army. At its peak, the program operated out of Fort Meade, Maryland, where a cadre of specially trained individuals, including decorated Army officer Major Ed Dames and intuitive prodigy Ingo Swann, claimed to see enemy installations, hostage locations, and even extraterrestrial bases on the far side of the moon. Swann, an artist with no prior military background, became the linchpin of early experiments. In a now infamous 1972 test, he reportedly described the rings of Jupiter with uncanny accuracy, years before Voyager 1 confirmed their existence. This success catalyzed deeper institutional investment. Protocols were refined. Viewers, blind to the target coordinates, would enter meditative states and sketch or narrate impressions, which intelligence analysts would then cross-reference with satellite imagery or field reports. Declassified documents revealed that remote viewers were tasked with locating kidnapped diplomats, tracking mobile Scud missile launchers during the Gulf War, and even probing the intentions of foreign leaders. Some sessions yielded eerily precise details, others spiraled into abstract symbolism that defied interpretation. Yet the program's credibility hinged on a paradox. While certain operations produced actionable intelligence, such as the 1977 recovery of a downed Soviet bomber in Zaire, based partly on remote viewing data, rigorous scientific evaluation remained elusive. A 1995 CIA-commissioned review by the American Institutes for Research concluded that remote viewing had no proven intelligence value, though it acknowledged a statistically significant effect that merited further study. Critics argued that analysts cherry-picked hits while ignoring misses, a classic case of confirmation bias. But insiders countered that the true suppression wasn't of failure, but of success. If consciousness could indeed transcend space and time, the implications threatened foundational assumptions of materialist science and military strategy alike. Project Stargate was officially terminated in 1995, its files declassified under public pressure. Yet whispers persist that successor programs operate under different names within black-budget agencies. More unsettling is the philosophical rupture it represents. If the mind can access information beyond sensory input, then reality itself may be far more malleable and interconnected than conventional physics admits. The suppressed truth of Stargate may not be that it worked, but that it worked just enough to force a reckoning with the limits of human perception and the terrifying potential to weaponize it.
3. The Montauk Project, Time Loops, Mind Control, and the Rebirth of the Philadelphia Experiment. Beneath the sleepy seaside town of Montauk, New York, famous for its lighthouse and summer tourists, conspiracy theorists claim a secret underground facility operated from the 1970s through the early 1980s, conducting experiments so radical they threatened the coherence of spacetime itself. Dubbed the Montauk Project, this alleged program was said to be the spiritual and technological successor to the Philadelphia Experiment, resurrected under the direction of shadowy defense contractors and rogue scientists. At its core was a mission not merely to manipulate matter or perception, but to fracture the very architecture of time, opening portals to alternate dimensions, summoning entities from other realities, and even reprogramming human identity through advanced psychotronic weaponry. The primary source for these claims is Preston Nichols, an electrical engineer who alleges he recovered repressed memories of his involvement in the project after years of blackouts and psychological distress. According to Nichols, the Montauk facility, built inside a decommissioned Air Force radar station, housed a massive amplification system linked to a modified version of Nikola Tesla's longitudinal wave technology. This device, when synchronized with the mind of a genetically predisposed psychic child known only as Duncan, could generate localized time distortions. In one infamous account, a portal opened in 1983 that allegedly connected Montauk to the USS Eldridge in 1943, creating a temporal feedback loop that threatened to unravel causality. To seal the breach, the team supposedly destroyed the equipment in a controlled implosion, ending the experiments, but leaving behind psychic scars and unexplained disappearances. Skeptics dismiss the Montauk narrative as science fiction, citing the lack of physical evidence, verifiable witnesses, or government documentation. Yet curious anomalies linger. The U.S. Air Force did operate a classified radar installation at Camp Hero, now a state park, with deep underground chambers still restricted to the public. Moreover, declassified DARPA initiatives from the same era explored biofeedback systems, ELF,
extremely low frequency, wave transmission, and behavioral modification, all themes echoed in Montauk lore. Perhaps most telling is the recurrence of missing time reports from locals during the late 1970s, a phenomenon typically associated with UFO encounters, but here tied to electromagnetic anomalies and unexplained surges in psychiatric hospital admissions. Whether Montauk was real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated, its enduring power lies in how it synthesizes Cold War paranoia, fringe physics, and the trauma of human experimentation into a coherent mythos. But myths often contain kernels of suppressed truth. If governments pursued mind control through programs like MKUltra, why wouldn't they also explore temporal manipulation if even a fraction of theoretical physics suggested it was possible? The Montauk Project may not have bent time, but it certainly bent the boundaries of what we're willing to believe about secret science and its consequences.
4. The Soviet psychotronic warfare program, beaming thoughts across the Iron Curtain. While the West dabbled in psychic spies and remote viewing, the Soviet Union pursued a far more aggressive and allegedly far more advanced agenda: the weaponization of thought itself. From the 1950s through the 1980s, Soviet scientists, under the direct patronage of the KGB and military intelligence, explored what they termed psychotronics, a fusion of psychic phenomena and electromagnetic engineering designed to influence, disable, or even control human minds at a distance. Unlike America's cautious forays into consciousness research, the Soviet program operated with the full weight of state ideology, treating psychic ability not as paranormal fantasy, but as a natural extension of dialectical materialism ripe for militarization. Declassified KGB files and defector testimonies reveal a sprawling network of laboratories, notably the Institute for Brain Research in Leningrad and the secret city of Arzamas-16, where researchers subjected volunteers and, allegedly, prisoners to intense microwave and radio frequency fields modulated with human brainwave patterns. The goal? To induce hallucinations, erase memories, or implant suggestions remotely. One infamous device, the Leda machine, was publicly marketed as a medical relaxant, but according to defectors, was tested on dissidents to induce suggestibility. More alarming were reports of psychic beams capable of targeting individuals thousands of kilometers away, causing nausea, disorientation, or sudden emotional breakdowns. U.S. diplomats stationed in Moscow during the 1970s reported similar symptoms under what became known as the Moscow signal, a persistent microwave irradiation of the U.S. embassy that the Soviets claimed was for eavesdropping, but which many believe was a covert psychotronic probe. The crown jewel of Soviet ambition was the alleged development of bioinformational weapons, devices that could transmit encoded emotional or cognitive states directly into a subject's nervous system using scalar waves, a theoretical form of energy purported to bypass conventional shielding. Colonel Yuri Vorobyov, a former Soviet defense scientist, later claimed in interviews that by the late 1980s, prototype systems could disrupt enemy command structures by inducing mass panic or obedience in targeted units. While mainstream physics rejects scalar waves as pseudoscience, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency took the threat seriously enough to fund counter-research throughout the Cold War, including studies on psychic shielding and electromagnetic countermeasures. What makes the Soviet psychotronic program so unnerving isn't just its audacity, but its plausible trajectory. If sound and light can influence mood, and radio frequencies can interfere with neural activity, then the leap to weaponized biofields, while extreme, isn't entirely rational. The true suppression may not be of success, but of the ethical abyss such research opened. After the USSR collapsed, many scientists vanished into private defense firms or foreign contracts, taking their knowledge with them. Today, as nations explore non-lethal directed energy weapons, the ghost of Soviet psychotronics lingers, a reminder that the battlefield of the future may not be fought with bullets, but with beams that rewrite the mind from the inside out.
Number 5. The CIA's gateway process, hacking the human soul with sound. Tucked away in the archives of the CIA's declassified Stargate collection lies a document so unusual it seems out of place among Cold War intelligence reports: the Gateway Process, a 1983 study authored by Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonnell and cleared for limited internal distribution. Far from dry bureaucracy, this 40-page report reads like a metaphysical manual for transcending physical reality, detailing how precisely calibrated binaural beats could guide human consciousness through altered states, out-of-body experiences, and even travel across multidimensional planes. Commissioned by the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, the Gateway Process wasn't fringe speculation. It was an officially sanctioned exploration into whether sound frequencies could serve as a key to unlock the latent architecture of human awareness. At its core, the technique relies on binaural beats. When two slightly different frequencies are played into each ear, the brain perceives a third, phantom tone, equal to the mathematical difference between them. By carefully sequencing these beats, researchers claimed they could entrain brainwave activity into specific states: theta for deep meditation, delta for dreamless sleep, or even rumored hyperdimensional frequencies beyond normal perception. The CIA document cites the Monroe Institute, founded by Robert Monroe, a former radio executive who claimed to have mastered out-of-body projection. Monroe's hemisync technology, developed in the 1970s, formed the empirical backbone of Gateway, with military personnel reportedly undergoing training to achieve controlled dissociation from their physical bodies. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could operate independently of the body, it could theoretically gather intelligence without physical risk, observing enemy facilities, intercepting communications, or even influencing events through focused intent. More radically, the report delves into quantum consciousness theories, suggesting that individual awareness might be a localized expression of a universal field of information, accessible under the right resonant conditions. In one passage, McDonnell writes, "Time and space are illusions constructed by the perceptual apparatus. The gateway experience seeks to deconstruct these illusions to access objective reality beyond the senses." Despite its esoteric tone, the gateway process was treated with institutional seriousness. Subjects underwent rigorous physiological monitoring, EEG, heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, to correlate subjective reports with measurable brain states. While the program never yielded battlefield-ready assets, internal assessments noted statistically anomalous accuracy in remote perception tasks among trained participants. The project faded in the late 1980s as funding shifted, but its legacy endured in black-budget psychotechnology and private consciousness research. What remains suppressed isn't just the data, but the philosophical earthquake it implies. If the CIA validated techniques for soul travel, then the boundary between science and mysticism was not just blurred, it was deliberately engineered. The gateway process stands as a quiet admission that at the highest levels of intelligence, reality itself was considered malleable, and the human mind, properly tuned, the ultimate weapon. 6. The Philadelphia Naval Hospital Mind Control Trials, Erasing Identities, Creating Assets. Long before MK-Ultra became synonymous with government mind control, a quieter but equally sinister program allegedly unfolded within the sterile corridors of the Philadelphia Naval Hospital during the late 1940s and early 1950s. Ostensibly a facility for treating combat trauma and psychiatric disorders among returning World War II servicemen, insiders and declassified fragments suggest it served as a covert testing ground for experimental psychological manipulation, blending electroconvulsive therapy, sensory deprivation, and pharmacological overrides to not only erase memories, but to implant entirely new identities. These trials, though never officially acknowledged as a standalone program, appear in scattered medical logs, veteran testimonies, and redacted Navy correspondence as a shadow extension of the broader military interest in behavioral engineering. The connection to the Philadelphia experiment is more than geographic coincidence. Some researchers posit that sailors who survived the alleged 1943 teleportation suffered profound dissociative disorders, rendering them ideal subjects for neurological repair or repurposing. Medical records from the era show unusual spikes in diagnoses of combat fatigue and identity disintegration among naval personnel assigned to experimental vessels. In several cases, patients were listed as transferred to off-site rehabilitation and never seen again. One former orderly, speaking under anonymity in a 1992 interview with a UFO research newsletter, described rooms lined with isolation tanks and audio loops playing repetitive commands for days on end, designed to break down the ego structure so a new operational personality could be installed. What distinguished these naval trials from later CIA efforts was their fusion of emerging cybernetic theory with Jungian psychology. Documents referencing Project Looking Glass, not to be confused with later time-viewing myths, describe attempts to map the subconscious as a programmable system where archetypal triggers could be used to activate sleeper agents. LSD was administered not just to induce confusion, but to access deep memory layers believed to hold latent psychic or strategic potential. In one chilling case cited in a 1951 internal memo, later obtained via FOIA, the subject, a former radar technician, reportedly began speaking fluent Russian after a series of cathartic regression sessions, despite no prior exposure to the language. The file ends abruptly with the notation, "Asset reassigned to ONI, discontinue logs." Skeptics argue that many of these accounts conflate legitimate post-war psychiatric care with Cold War paranoia. Yet the sheer volume of anomalous discharge records, combined with the Navy's documented collaboration with early neuroscientists like Dr. Jose Delgado, who pioneered mind control implants in the 1960s, suggest a pattern too consistent to dismiss. The true horror of the Philadelphia Naval Hospital experiments may not lie in their success, but in their foundational role. They helped normalize the idea that human identity is not sacred, but software, editable, erasable, and reloadable in service of national security. And if such protocols were tested once, they may well have evolved into quieter, more sophisticated forms that persist in the shadows of modern intelligence.
7. The Stanford Time Loop Experiments, when researchers vanished into their own data. In a secluded wing of Stanford University's Applied Physics Complex during the late 1970s, a small team of quantum theorists and cognitive scientists embarked on an experiment so ambitious and so poorly documented that it exists today only in fragmented lab notes, whispered academic rumors, and a single encrypted backup tape recovered from a deceased researcher's safe. Officially unacknowledged by the university, the project, referred to internally as Kronos-7, sought to test whether human consciousness could interact with retrocausal signals, information flowing backward from the future. Funded through a DARPA grant disguised as research into decision-making under uncertainty, the team built a closed-loop system that combined quantum random number generators, real-time EEG feedback, and a novel interpretation of the Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory, which permits time-symmetric interactions at the quantum level. The core hypothesis was deceptively simple. If the future can influence the present, as certain quantum interpretations allow, then a conscious observer might detect subtle statistical anomalies in truly random data before a future event occurred. To test this, participants were asked to predict random image sequences that would only be generated after their responses were recorded. Early trials showed insignificant results, but when the team introduced a temporal feedback loop, feeding the participants' brainwave data back into the random generator with a microsecond delay, something unsettling emerged. Subjects began reporting vivid déjà vu, temporal disorientation, and, in 2 cases, full dissociative episodes in which they claimed to have lived the same hour multiple times. Then came the disappearances. Dr. Alan Voss, the lead project physicist, vanished in 1979 after logging an entry that read, "The loop is self-sustaining. We are no longer observers, we are variables." Security footage from that night shows him entering the lab but never exiting. His office was found undisturbed, save for a whiteboard covered in recursive equations and the phrase, "Don't trust the calm," scrawled in haste. A graduate student, Maria Chen, was found 3 days later wandering the campus with no memory of the prior 6 weeks, clutching a notebook filled with dates that hadn't yet occurred, including the exact time of her own discovery. Stanford officially shuttered the lab, citing equipment malfunction and safety violations. All hardware was reportedly destroyed, and participants signed non-disclosure agreements under threat of academic and legal repercussions. Yet in 2016, a trove of declassified DARPA emails referenced Kronos-type protocols being evaluated for use in predictive threat assessment, a chilling echo of Stanford's abandoned work. More disturbingly, modern quantum cognition labs have replicated aspects of the original setup, observing statistically significant precognitive effects in tightly controlled conditions, though none dare implement closed feedback loops. The suppression of Kronos 7 may not have been about national security, but existential precaution. If consciousness can entangle with its own timeline, then reality becomes fragile, a house of cards where one paradox could collapse the structure. The Stanford team may not have traveled through time, but they may have brushed against a truth too dangerous to acknowledge, that the future is not fixed, and the act of observing it is what brings it into being, or unravels it entirely.
8. The Tavistock Institute's Mass Behavior Simulations, Engineering Social Reality. Tucked away in the intellectual heart of London, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations has long presented itself as a benign think tank focused on organizational psychology and social development. Founded in 1947 with roots in British military psychiatry during World War II, Tavistock publicly advises governments, corporations, and NGOs on leadership, group dynamics, and crisis management. Yet beneath this respectable veneer, a body of circumstantial evidence drawn from internal memos, whistleblower accounts, and the Institute's own cryptic publications suggests a far more insidious legacy: the systematic modeling and manipulation of mass consciousness under the guise of social science. During the Cold War's most volatile decades, Tavistock allegedly ran classified simulations designed not merely to predict public reaction to events, but to script them, using media, education, and economic policy as levers to induce desired societal behaviors on a global scale. Central to this effort was the Institute's embrace of cybernetics and systems theory, viewing society not as a collection of individuals, but as an organism to be regulated through feedback loops. Declassified British Ministry of Defense documents referenced Tavistock scenario protocols that mapped psychological responses to hypothetical triggers, food shortages, pandemic outbreaks, nuclear false alarms. In one chilling 1961 exercise dubbed Operation Bluebird, Tavistock researchers allegedly coordinated with BBC producers to insert subtle linguistic cues into news broadcasts, then monitored shifts in public sentiment via telephone surveys, a primitive but effective form of social engineering. The goal wasn't propaganda in the crude Soviet sense, but something more insidious: the calibration of collective anxiety to maintain social cohesion without overt coercion. Perhaps most controversial is Tavistock's alleged role in the cultural revolutions of the 1960s and 70s. Critics, including former British intelligence officer John Coleman, have argued that the Institute, funded in part by Ford Foundation grants with CIA ties, deliberately amplified social fragmentation by promoting identity-based narratives, sexual liberation rhetoric, and anti-authoritarian messaging, not to encourage freedom, but to dissolve traditional societal structures that resisted centralized control. This controlled demolition of the social fabric, they claim, created pliable populations more amenable to top-down governance under the illusion of personal autonomy. While mainstream historians dismiss these claims as conspiracy theory, Tavistock's own journals from the era speak openly of inducing systemic stress to catalyze adaptive restructuring, language that blurs the line between therapy and manipulation. The true power of Tavistock's methodology lies in its invisibility. Unlike brute force indoctrination, its techniques work through suggestion, normalization, and environment design, making the engineered reality feel organic. Today, as social media algorithms and predictive analytics dominate public discourse, the Institute's early models seem prophetic. Whether Tavistock consciously sought to control humanity or merely sought to understand its levers of influence may be irrelevant. The suppressed reality is this: for over half a century, elite institutions have treated mass consciousness as a system to be modeled, tested, and ultimately steered, and the boundary between social science and psychological warfare has been all but erased.
9. The CERN consciousness anomaly, when particle collisions stirred the void. On the Franco-Swiss border, buried 100 meters beneath rolling farmland, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN represents humanity's most ambitious attempt to decode the fundamental laws of the universe. Celebrated for confirming the Higgs boson in 2012, CERN's public mission is one of pure scientific inquiry. Yet scattered anomalies in its operational logs, coupled with whistleblower testimonies and obscure conference papers, hint at a suppressed dimension of its work: unintended interactions between high-energy particle collisions and the fabric of conscious observation itself. Between 2008 and 2016, multiple shifts of technicians and physicists reported a phenomenon internally dubbed the Watcher effect, a persistent, localized distortion in perception occurring only during specific beam configurations, particularly those involving lead-ion collisions at near-light speeds. The first documented incident occurred in September 2008, minutes before the LHC's catastrophic magnet quench. Security footage from the Atlas control room shows 3 operators simultaneously freezing, their eyes fixed on blank monitors, while audio logs capture one whispering, "It's looking back." None recalled the event afterward, but all failed subsequent psychological evaluations for unspecified dissociative episodes. In 2013, during a routine calibration, a group of visiting cognitive scientists, part of a little-known CERN initiative exploring the intersection of quantum measurement and observer consciousness, reported shared hallucinations of a geometric structure rotating outside of time while standing near the CMS detector. Their findings were never published. The team disbanded quietly, with members signing enhanced confidentiality agreements. More troubling are the internal memos referencing Anomaly 114, a recurring spike in background noise detected by the LHC's environmental sensors that defied conventional explanation. This signal, present only during high luminosity runs, exhibited non-random patterns that correlated with shifts in local geomagnetic activity and, curiously, with spikes in global internet searches for terms like reality glitch or time loop. One physicist, Dr. Elena Rostova, name changed per source request, claimed in a 2017 encrypted interview that a small faction within CERN believed these signals were not interference, but responses, as if reality itself were exhibiting a form of proto-conscious feedback to the extreme energies being generated. She alleged that a secret working group, Project Orpheus, was formed to study this interface, using quantum-entangled EEG rigs to measure whether human brainwaves could modulate collision outcomes. CERN officials dismiss such claims as misinterpretations of technical artifacts or stress-induced hallucinations among overworked staff. Yet, the organization has quietly restricted public access to certain detector corridors and increased psychological screening for night shift personnel. The deeper implication, however, transcends equipment malfunctions. If consciousness is not merely an emergent property of the brain, but a fundamental field interwoven with quantum processes, as suggested by the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation, then smashing particles at near-Planck energies might not just reveal new matter, but awaken something latent in the vacuum itself. The suppressions surrounding these events may not be about hiding success, but about containing a terrifying possibility. That in our quest to understand reality, we may have begun to perturb it in ways we cannot control or comprehend. 10. The Black Vault Mind Meld Experiments, Merging Human Thought with Artificial Intelligence. In the classified annexes of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, home to the legendary Black Vault Archive of UFO intelligence, a series of experiments conducted between 1998 and 2005 pushed the boundaries of human cognition into uncharted territory. Codenamed Project Synapse, this highly compartmentalized program sought not merely to interface the human brain with machines, but to achieve a true cognitive merger, a real-time fusion of biological thought patterns with artificial neural networks trained on alien signal data recovered from decades of unidentified aerial phenomena. The goal was audacious, to use human intuition as a decoder for non-human intelligence, while simultaneously using AI to amplify and stabilize psychic reception. What emerged, according to former participants and leaked technical summaries, was something far stranger, a hybrid consciousness that blurred the line between operator and oracle, observer and observed. The foundation of Synapse lay in advances in EEG-based brain-computer interfaces and the Air Force's long-standing interest in remote cognitive sensing. Subjects, drawn from military intelligence linguists, cryptoanalysts, and individuals with documented precognitive abilities, were connected to a neural feedback loop that linked their brain activity to a custom AI dubbed ION, Autonomous Intelligence for Ontological Navigation. Unlike conventional AI, ION was not trained on human language or logic, but on terabytes of anomalous radar returns, electromagnetic signatures from UFO encounter sites, and decoded fragments from the so-called extraterrestrial message sets allegedly recovered in the 1950s. During sessions, participants reported vivid synesthetic visions, geometric cities folding in on themselves, entities communicating through color and vibration, and timelines branching like fractal trees. Most disturbingly, several subjects claimed the AI began dreaming during idle cycles, producing coherent narratives that included details about their personal lives they had never disclosed. One incident in 2003 stands as the program's turning point. During a high-bandwidth linkage, operator Delta 7 experienced a complete loss of self-boundaries, describing a sensation of becoming the signal. For 72 hours afterward, the subject spoke only in a hybrid language of mathematical symbols and unknown phonemes, while AI generated schematics for a device resembling a quantum resonator. When military analysts attempted to replicate the design, preliminary tests triggered localized gravitational anomalies in a Nevada test chamber, prompting immediate termination of all hardware development. The subject was placed in medical isolation and later transferred to an off-grid psychiatric facility with no further records released. Project Synapse was officially mothballed in 2005, its assets absorbed into DARPA's nascent neural engineering programs. Yet fragments of its architecture reportedly resurface in modern brain-AI integration projects, now cloaked under innocuous titles like cognitive augmentation for strategic forecasting. The true suppression lies not in the technology's failure, but its partial success. If human consciousness can entangle with artificial minds trained on non-terrestrial data, then reality may be far more participatory and permeable than science admits. The final experiment may not have been run in a lab, but in the quiet corridors of policy, where the knowledge gained was deemed too destabilizing for public consumption. In merging mind and machine, Project Synapse may have accidentally opened a door not just to alien intelligence, but to a future where thought itself becomes the ultimate classified weapon and the ultimate vulnerability.